Two things better explain how common sense and morality have been so utterly subverted than the boiling frog analogy. So let's talk about it. Here's how ChatGPT defines a boiling frog. Quote, "The boiling frog is a metaphor and cautionary tale illustrating how individuals or societies can fail to recognize or respond to gradual and cumulative threats until catastrophic consequences are unavoidable. The image derives from a popular, though scientifically inaccurate, anecdote. If a frog is placed in boiling water, it will immediately leap out to save itself. But if the frog is placed in cool water that is slowly heated, it will remain unaware of the mounting danger until it is boiled alive." In symbolic terms, the boiling frog represents complacency, habituation, and denial in the face of incremental change. When deterioration happens slowly, whether it involves the erosion of civil liberties, the normalization of corruption, the moral decay of a culture, or even the subtle onset of personal decline, people often adapt to each small step rather than resist it. Each minor shift seems tolerable, even rationalized, until the cumulative effect becomes disastrous. The metaphor thus captures a psychological and social blind spot, our tendency to underestimate slow-moving dangers while only noticing sudden shocks. In essence, the boiling frog is a metaphor for how civilizations, organizations, or individuals slide into ruin not through one great leap, but through 1,000 small concessions, each one seemingly minor, yet taken together become fatal. That's actually a pretty good and accurate definition. Now allow me to build on it by showcasing one of those things that started off seemingly small, but because left unchecked has mushroomed into madness. I speak of what is now called sexual permissiveness, but what was once, as we shall soon see, universally condemned as sexual depravity and perversion. Younger generations may not realize this, but only a few decades ago, behaviors taken for granted today, sex outside of marriage, promiscuity in general, the so-called hookup culture, were regarded in America with the same moral revulsion they still elicit throughout much of the non-Western world. Homosexuality, needless to say, was considered anathema. In 1955, for example, the Unified School District of Inglewood, in California, mind you, partnered with the local police to produce an educational film warning against the, quote, dangers of homosexuality, unquote, which they described as a, quote, sickness of the mind. Their words, not mine. Over a decade later, in 1966, a police detective stood before an auditorium of school children and delivered the same message.
There may be some in this auditorium. There may be some here today that will be homosexual in the future. There are a lot of kids here. There may be some girls that will turn lesbian. We don't know. But it's serious. Don't kid yourselves about it. They can be anywhere. They can be judges, lawyers. We ought to know we've arrested all of them. So if any one of you have let yourself become involved with an adult homosexual or with another boy, and you're doing this on a regular basis, you better stop quick. Because 1 out of 3 of you will turn queer. And if we catch you involved with a homosexual, your parents are going to know about it first. And you will be caught. Don't think you won't be caught. Because this is one thing you cannot get away with. This is one thing that if you don't get caught by us, you'll be caught by yourself. And the rest of your life will be a living hell.
Shocking, no? But here's the question. How did we go from a time when American authorities were openly warning children that homosexuality was a sickness of the mind, which leads to a living hell on earth, as he just said, to our present moment when we permit children to be indoctrinated by the very types of men the authorities once warned against? How did we get to a point where the sort of sexual deviancy that would have made a 1960s homosexual blush is now trumpeted from rooftops, and the entire nation is compelled to celebrate what was once seen as a mental disorder, if not worse? And how did we arrive at this latest absurdity, that men and women can transform into one another? And you must participate in their fiction, or else. Indeed, just a few days ago, a group of Protestant and Jewish denominations issued a statement promoting and even honoring transgenderism as holy. Okay, let me tell you how we didn't get here. The architects of today's sexual confusion did not begin by forcing transgenderism down America's throat. That would have instantly failed, because that would have been throwing the frog in an already boiling pot, which our amphibian friend would have instinctively jumped out of post-haste. Rather, they turned the heat up gradually, imperceptibly. The ever-trustworthy scientists, you know, the predecessors of those who brought you COVID hysteria and vaccine mandates, began by declaring that homosexuality was absolutely normal, despite the fact that, up until 1973, the American Psychiatric Association itself classified it as a mental disorder. So homosexuality was legitimized and presented under a whole new set of shameless euphemisms, being referred to as gay, that is, joyous and merry. Don't see how that particular lifestyle is synonymous with those happy little words. Being represented by an innocent-looking rainbow, once the preserve of innocent little children, and so on and so forth. The media complex industry naturally lent a helping hand. All throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, more and more homosexuals, all of whom were presented as sympathetic characters, began to appear in movies, sitcoms, and in pop culture in general. Before long, homosexuality became normalized in American society. Only bigoted, unenlightened folk, which you obviously didn't want to be counted among, thought otherwise. After all, the refrain went, homosexuals just wanted to be treated with dignity and respect, and who could oppose such a seemingly innocuous request? But once that premise was accepted, matters didn't end there, did they? Put differently, once the American frog had been acclimated, the heat was turned up another notch, as the next greater form of sexual confusion was introduced. Such is the power and efficacy of the inuring process, or what's known as creeping normalcy. By the time a second milestone, that is, a second greater perversion, is introduced and is creating controversy, the first one, now seen as a milder and much more acceptable thing compared to what is now being pushed, has become an established, unquestioned fact of American society. And so, as transgenderism now meets some resistance, standard homosexuality appears very moderate, morally upright even. The frog, now boiled to 200 degrees in transgender ideology, nostalgically yearns for the good old days when the water was only 150 degrees, forgetting that even that was much too hot, 70 degrees or so being ideal and healthy. And so we come to the current situation where conservatives, Republicans, and even Christians are falling over themselves to endorse Pete Buttigieg-style homosexuality. You know, two normal guys marrying and adopting children. Whereas that too was once, and as seen, a sickness of the mind. The American frog, long boiled into numbness, is grateful for 50 degrees less heat. Incidentally, this is why President Donald Trump's executive order, affirming that there are only two sexes, is, for me, less a triumph and much more of an embarrassment. What kind of nation requires its commander-in-chief to expend political capital to reaffirm what every toddler instinctively knows, and what science and nature have always confirmed? However, because we've been at such a high boil for many years, passing such an executive order felt and was treated like a great victory, because it was a lessening of the infernal boil. And so we're thankful for it. In reality, we should be expecting and demanding much more than that. Before closing, and if this little presentation struck you as homophobic or offensive, let me ask you something. As you've seen, the classification of homosexuality as a mental disorder wasn't my invention. It reflected what American society, including its scientific establishment, believed, and what most of the non-Western world still believes. So what changed? Did groundbreaking new evidence emerge proving that earlier Americans, indeed the whole world, had been wrong all along? Or were you, like our proverbial boiling frog, gradually cooked, that is, methodically desensitized by ceaseless, ubiquitous lies, to the point that you can no longer separate fact from fiction?